Let's bring in filmmaker and commentator Army Horowitz. Army, this is the latest mass shooting attributed to a trans or non binary killer, or as the Canadian authorities call him, the gun person. God forbid they should misgender a mass killer.
That includes the deceased gun person.
Okay. And then separately, do you know the gun person's relationship to...
Army, what more do we know about this gunman, Jesse Van Rutzelaar, and this horrific crime?
Yeah, you stole one of my notes. I mean, how Orwellian, gun person. That is, God, that is chilling and crazy. Yes, we know this was a trans person. First of all, look, as we now have to say, we talk about gun laws and what their effects are ultimately on shootings. Canada has one of the strictest gun laws, certainly in the world, and yet this is a mass shooting that we've had. Look, if the gunman, Rita, if the gunman wasn't a straight white male, it's the job of the authorities to hide their identity. That's the way it works, right? It's a straight white male. We'll identify him all the live long day. But if it's not, so if it's a trans person, we're going to do whatever we can to obscure what the identity is, right? And look, I had, like I always do, I do show prep, and I did my research with AI, and we always have that fun AI stories. And I asked, well, what percent of school shootings we've had in the last 5 years have been from trans people? And it refused to give me a number. It kept saying it's a very, very low number. I swear it would not. I had to list every single one of the last 5 years mass school shootings and individually go through them. And what's the answer? There's been 5 in the last 5 years, and 2 of the 5, 40%, have been people who are trans or non-binary. Yet
since we last talked about this, I went and checked that out for myself. I asked the not just ChatGPT but Grok, and asked precisely what you were talking about, to list the number of mass shootings in the recent years that have involved a trans shooter or a non-binary shooter, and it just refuses to do it. When you then give it a number of events, it will acknowledge it and repeat those to you, but it will not compile a list, which is extraordinary, because I could ask it to compile any other sort of list and it will normally do it. But there is just this determination not to acknowledge that perhaps there is a problem here. Now let's move along to the House of Representatives today, passing a massive election integrity bill, 218 to 213 votes. We've talked about this before, Army, about how popular this policy is. Around 85% of Americans back voter ID, but the Democrats continue to oppose it. They voted against the Save America Act, Army.
Yeah, and this happens over and over and over again. All the Democrats voted against it in the House, save one. Look, there's a reason why they continue to push universal mail-in balloting and ballot harvesting and voting all year long and against voter ID. And by the way, also voting for non-citizens to vote. I know. They all say that's not true. That's a scurrilous lie. It absolutely 100% is true. In New York, in Chicago, in San Francisco, in DC, and other cities, they have voted to have non-citizens vote, okay? I'm sorry, that's the reality. They want to try to get away from that all they want, but it's just not possible. Look, Rita, last week we talked about the reason why I made that voter ID video, because somebody voted for my dad. What I didn't tell you, the second part of that story, which ties into this, is that I took a photo of that and I sent that to the California Board of Elections. I go, look, you claim there's no voter fraud. Here is an absolute clear indication of voter fraud. You know how quickly they got back to me? They never got back to me. They don't care. They don't want to know. That's the reality. Look, Rita, in virtually every Western European country, you have to show ID to vote. That's just part of what it is. They don't want to safeguard elections because they call safeguarding elections voter suppression. That's the Democratic Party. Okay, the reality is they want this problematic issue to be in our voting because they feel whatever. We can go into, that's a whole different discussion on why they don't want voter integrity. I think that they think it's going to help elect Democrats, okay? And this, Rita, is the party of democracy.
It's the only answer, Army. That's the only answer. Why else would you campaign against, vote against a policy that poll after poll shows around 85% of Americans back? And we brought you the CNN coverage of that issue last week. The polling on this is clear. This is almost it's not even an 80-20 issue. It's close to a 90-10 issue. And yet the Democrats are staunchly against voter ID. Now, talking about Democrats, Democrat heartland of California has lost another billionaire. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is fleeing Gavin Newsom's California and heading to Florida. Army. He has purchased a massive waterfront mansion in Miami, and he is expected to live in it. It's not supposed to be a holiday home. They're expecting him to move to the red state in April. Why are so many people leaving California for places like Florida and Texas and Tennessee? It's a bit of a theme there.
Yeah, I can't tell if that was a rhetorical question or a real question, Rita. Well, I mean, California is it's unbelievable. Here's the data, okay? In the last 10 years, 10 million people have left California, including dozens of billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg, taking with them all their job creation, all their innovation. It's all going out the door to the states who are welcoming people who want to create wealth, okay? Not California. The greatest stat of all is that if you want to rent a U-Haul one way from California to Texas, it is 4 times more expensive in that direction than Texas coming back because no one is doing that. Look, this hurts my heart. It does. As you know, I am a long-time I live in New York, but I am a LA boy. I am a California boy at heart, okay? And it pains me to no end to see the destruction of my state. And one of the main drivers of the ultra-wealthy leaving is because they've been pushing, and now they're about to possibly pass, a 5% wealth tax on the ultra-rich. Now, to be clear what that is, you're talking about real estate holdings for businesses, you're talking about ownership of businesses, and you're talking about stock portfolios. And for those who don't understand what that means, that's not an extra 5% tax on your earnings. What that means is if you own a business that you haven't realized its gains because you're pouring all the money back into the business, if the business is valued at $1 billion, right? And I was told there wasn't going to be any math on this interview, but I guess there's going to be. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars that you have to pay because you have a business, or if you have stockholders, if you haven't realized the gains in your stock. It doesn't matter if you don't have that money. You have to pay that in taxes. No one can do that. Okay, that is a horrific albatross to have on you. And what that has done is driven people away. Now they've tried wealth taxes all over the world, and they have all failed spectacularly. Okay. And to be clear again, the rich don't pay their fair share, right? How often do you hear that? Okay, a couple of statistics, which I think is really, really helpful here, is that the top 1%, I'm going to read the notes because these numbers are important. The top 1% of earners, right, they pay 40% of all taxes. They earn 20% of all earnings, yet pay 40%. The bottom 50% pay 3% of all taxes, but earn 13%. Okay, the bottom I'm sorry these stats, but they're important. The bottom 50% pay 4% of their income in taxes. Okay, and the top 1%, they pay 27% of their income that they get in taxes. So you tell me, the rich don't pay their fair share. The rich are carrying this country. Okay, and what you're doing is you're trying to make them flee and leave. And by the way, if you do this writ large across the country, they're going to leave the country also because they just simply can't afford to do it.
As long as when they move to those red states, and we're seeing that similar trend from New York as well to places like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, just don't keep voting the same way that you have, because a lot of these people fleeing California keep voting Democrat in their new home state. Armie Horowitz, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Always a pleasure.